Okay, so etymological categories in Vietnamese and caveats, the warnings. So Austroasiatic and the etymological categories um, include the Austroasiatic and Vietic lexical retentions, those words that have been kept. And then we have Old and Middle Chinese loanwords. And generally, the Han Viet, the Sino-Vietnamese Han Viet are are from late Middle Chinese, and everything before late Middle Chinese is what I call early Chinese loanwords from the Old Chinese and early Middle Chinese loanwords. And then the early Dai Vietic words, and I have not said Dai loanwords. In the past, I would say Dai loanwords, but now I'm going to say Dai Vietic words because I don't know which way they were borrowed. I don't think there is enough evidence to say this. And then aerial words, meaning in, Southeast Asia, China, this big area. And so those are the different kinds of words we can see in Vietnamese. And so let's review these data and methods. We have massive amounts of digitized data, right? You saw that database and you can search through it. And we're talking about several language families. So we've seen Sino-Tibetan, Austroasiatic, Austronesian, Hmong-Mien, Thai Kadai, even over in India. And there are many sub-branches, hundreds of languages and dialects, and the proto-language reconstructions. Okay, so this is the data. Compare all data for best results. All previous claims which have been based on incomplete data must be reevaluated. I will say that again. All previous claims which have been based on the data that I showed you in that database here, that one, let me go back to it. I'll show it to you. This this one here. This database has been around since 2007. People were not using this much data before, and they added more data since 2007. Before, in the end of the 20th century, there was not even half of this data available. Certainly not in one place. This is a huge amount of data, and this is one database. I showed you the other databases too, right? That's a huge amount of data. This was not available 20 years ago. 20 years ago, there was not this much data available, and you certainly couldn't search in them. Okay, huge amounts of data available. All previous claims have been based on incomplete data. That means even the smart people, all of those smart people making claims we have to check it again. Seek consistency in sound and meaning in the comparative method, identifying phonological patterns, and seeking semantic consistency or explainable semantic shift. And when I say semantic shift, I mean that meaning changes a little bit. So Vietnamese gui for firewood, but in other Austroasiatic languages, it could be fire or firewood. That's reasonable semantic shift. That's acceptable. The takeaway: one must effectively consider phonology, morphology, syntax, and semantics, especially to exclude possibilities. Don't try to include, try to exclude, because then you know that your data will be better after you exclude. Without this, claims of words of shared origin in languages are weak at best. If we don't do this, people making claims, they're not very good claims. Considering broader sociocultural aspects, ethnohistorical information, archaeological studies, semantic cultural domains, combining these massive quantities of lexical data, effective use of the comparative method, and interdisciplinary elements is the only way to make progress. I'm going to say this one more time. We've got to combine all of this to make progress. So that's what I talked about in the first hour, right? So now, how do we get to the data? Vietic lects. I'm going to use this word lect. I'm sure you've seen the word dialect, and you take off the dia part and it lects. Basically means it's a language or a dialect, and we're not so sure. This word lect is kind of useful because sometimes we don't know the difference between a language and a dialect. It's not always easy. So here's what we have. This is the list. Okay. And so I have a database with this, and in fact, I've got more, but I'm still processing it. And here's the Viet Minh part. This is Vietnamese. Here's Hmong. There's more Hmong than this, but this is what's in the database. Nguyen is another type. Here are these. There's Bong and Cui. These kinds of different type of Vedic languages. And then there are the very archaic ones. And these are the ones that have maybe two syllables. Remember Gao. Gao has like one syllable in these languages, but over here, some of them have two syllables, which means that that is very archaic, like the other Austroasiatic languages. Okay, so this is a lot of data. And here's my database. Here's a little snapshot. Okay, don't try to read this. This will give you a headache. Okay, but here's the Proto-Vietic, here's Austroasiatic, here are notes for maybe Chinese or Dai or something. Here's the Vietnamese words. And then all of these, here's Mung, 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 Nguyen, Nguyen, Bong, Gui, Maliang. Here's the different ones. There's Maliang, Malang, Malang. Two types of Cree, Chut, Chut, Chut. There's different types of Chut, different tabung and such. And this is what we do for comparative data. There's gaps. Sometimes there are gaps. You just have gaps. Sometimes you don't have the data. I'm still entering some of this data, and but this is what we have to do. Okay. Etymological sources of 800 plus Vietnamese words with Vietic reconstructions. I should be careful here. Vietic reconstructions does not always mean Proto-Vietic. So remember, I said Proto-Vietic was maybe 3,000 years ago, but some of these reconstructions are not that old. And I will show you what that means. So it's just, you can reconstruct it, but doesn't mean that it's a proto language level at the very beginning. It doesn't mean that. So of those 800, Proto-Vietic, it's about 60% of it. And when I say Proto-Vietic, I mean that it's not in other Austroasiatic languages. If it's in a lot of Austroasiatic languages, and then it's this category, Proto-Austroasiatic. Okay, quite a few though. Look at that. There's a lot of Proto-Austroasiatic vocabulary in Vietnamese. And then sometimes they're in neighboring Austroasiatic languages like Katuic and Bahnaric and Khmeric sometimes, some percentage here. Usually the Katuic and Bahnaric languages that are in Vietnam, those sometimes shared in, sometimes they are in Vietnamese and Vietic. And then here are the ones that are in Chinese, from Chinese. See, obviously these cannot be Proto-Vietic because these are only, this is only 2,000 years ago or 1,500 years ago or something. And then this is maybe a little more than 1,000 years ago. How can it, anyways, don't worry about that. That just creates confusion. And then there are these words that are Dai. And are they loan words from Dai? And this is where it's a problem. I don't think they are. Some of them might be, some of them are not. I don't think so, though. Okay. So a lot of this is native. Look at that. That's a lot. That's 85% of these 800 words that have been reconstructed. We usually think about how many Chinese words there are in Vietnamese, but for these that are reconstructed, meaning, they're original, right? They're more original. We expect it to be high. So there is a lot of original vocabulary in Vietnamese. So let's look at some of these semantic domains of Vietic and Austroasiatic. Okay, so for those 800 something words, basic actions in technology is something like go, swim, basic, I don't know, rope, something like that, these kinds of words. Animals, okay. We expect that, right? Because these are the words for animals in Southeast Asia, so we see them. That includes insects, fish, birds, snakes, all of those things. The parts of the body and maybe if you feel sick or so, those kinds of words are so this is, by the way, what we call this is basic vocabulary. Basic vocabulary. The physical world, such as I would normally say fog, but mưa, rain, um, may, clouds, those kinds of words are native original words. Um, some things with kinship. Then we get down here, these other categories. Look at this, like a kinship, clothing and grooming, the household. So we can see a little bit more cultural things here in these smaller numbers, but that's fine. There are plenty of numbers for these cultural things, original concepts for society, early Vedic society. Okay. Okay, it's just a way of looking at semantic domains a little bit more. And so numbers, let's get some samples, numbers and samples. So if we're talking about general actions, to flood, to drip, to slip, here are the Vietnamese words. Here are the Proto-Vietic words. Okay. Manipulation of objects. So va, and we see to hit, to slap with a hand slap there. Bop, there for to peel. And these are Proto-Austroasiatic. PAA means also in Proto-Austroasiatic. Okay. And we can see, I'm not going to explain all of the patterns, but they are there. So we see, these kinds of words, and quite a few of them are even in Proto-Austroasiatic. And okay. There we go. Look, I like these here. The to comb, there, jai, bui, va, there for those kinds of things. Combing your hair, plaiting the hair, sewing, some things like that, or repairing. So this is what we expect for original lifestyle. And numbers. Okay. Mothai Babon, 1, 2, 3, 4 are all Proto-Austroasiatic words. Okay, well, this is complicated. Hi, it's actually Vi should be related to this. I have to fix that. Oh, I got to fix that. But these other ones are not in Proto-Austroasiatic. However, I think I can't remember which ones, but 6, 7, 8, 9, I think, are related also to Bahnaric, but not Katuic. So this is one of the problems. I originally thought, oh, Katuic, which is next to Vietic, might be related, but it's strange because Katuic doesn't have these words, but Bahnaric does. So that's I just don't see I think the Vieto-Katuic idea does not have good support, and this is one reason. It's not just this, but okay. Ooh, did I make a misspelling? Oh, I think I made a that's okay. I'll fix any misspellings there. Okay, so these are Vietic words. So we've got very good representation of these kinds of numbers and quantity words here. Okay. Words for measurements such as time and or units of time. And in fact, look at this. Ngai and nam are both Proto-Austroasiatic words. So these are very deep history, day and year there. Um, yes. Proto-Vietic pronouns. Okay, so this word, now I'm going to say these words. Now, nobody be upset, please. Tao and mai. Oh, you're supposed to be upset, right? Because those are not the polite words. But they are the original words. These are original. Mai specifically is Proto-Austroasiatic. Okay, that's a very common one. This word is seen. Tao is apparently only, as far as I can tell, it's in only in Vietic. I have not seen it in other languages. Um, Also, Han, there we go. That's probably Proto-Austroasiatic. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it is probably related to this form. So, okay, all right, there we go. So this is so for I, you, he, she, it. We have some very native forms here. Locational words. You know, we think of prepositions. These kinds of words here. Chai, gun, jen, juk, the, gui, um, zui. And so we have these kinds of words which are uh, location words, which are Proto-Vietic words. And even a few of them are Proto-Austroasiatic, PAA, Proto-Austroasiatic. So um, the Zui is most likely related to this Proto-Austroasiatic word. And I know it doesn't look familiar, it doesn't look similar, but the I have to explain it. The ah becomes oo, and the l becomes the e sound, and the kta becomes z. It's complicated, but that is probably the case. Um, uh, I'd have to show you the evidence. It's hard to explain. I don't need to worry about it. So we're looking at quite a few words, which are native words in Vietnamese, that are numbers, unit nouns, pronouns, these location words. But watch this. Proto-Vietic terms related to rice agriculture. This is very important because this shows these reconstructions of words that are for rice production or types of rice or products with rice. This is pretty strong evidence that when the Chinese arrived in the Han Dynasty, that the Vedic people were already growing and processing rice. And the archaeological record also supports this, and that it wasn't just the Vietic people, it was Austroasiatic people. So if we talk about 4,000 years ago, there was no Vietic, there was just Austroasiatic. But maybe 3,000 years ago, maybe 3,000 years ago, we can talk about Vietic. And these are the kinds of words that they were probably using. Okay. Um, I cannot prove all of them, but there are a lot of them. And the phonological patterns are good, and the semantics are good, and the archaeology is good. The archaeological record, not everything, but enough. And here's another page, more words. And of course, here's our Gao, and I mentioned num earlier in the presentation. Um, this word for pestle, and some of these are Austroasiatic words. These are Austroasiatic words, and so we definitely have, I think, very good evidence that Vietic people have been growing rice for thousands of years, at least a few thousand, and certainly Austroasiatic for longer than three, maybe 4,000 or something. How complex they were, I don't know, but this is pretty good. This is pretty good evidence, but I still don't know about this word. I don't know, was this shared by Dai groups? Was this shared into Dai groups languages? I mean, I don't know. Okay. So Now, here's another bit of fun. So, beetle, right? Your Taiwanese bilang. Oh, if when when oops, I didn't mean to hit stop that. Um, when when I lived in Taiwan 20 years ago, I remember I was in Yanshui, right, the small town, and so the taxi drivers would chew the binlang at the the train station, and they would spit the red stuff. Do they still? I don't think they do that so much now. Do they still do that in Taiwan? I heard that. Is it
Yes,
better
yeah,
now?
but not so much.
Not so much. Okay, that's good. But if what I am showing you here, we don't know the details of we don't know the archaeological details of this, but the words for the voi, the lime, zhao or zhao for betel leaf, and then gao for areca nut. These can be reconstructed in Proto-Vietic. Now, for Proto-Austroasiatic, we can reconstruct lime and betel leaf, not areca nut, but it looks like this goes back pretty far. I have seen different archaeological information, and I do not know. I thought maybe this was from, okay, so there's an Austronesian word, bulu, and bulu for betel leaf. And there is archaeological evidence of the chewing of this in the Philippines, maybe, I forget, I think it might have been 4,000 years ago or longer. But I thought it was only in the mid first millennium, but I recently saw an article by a Vietnamese ethnobotanist who claims there is evidence of the teeth blackening. You know, you chew the betel and leaf with the areca nut, and it makes your teeth darker, right? And that there was evidence of that from the Fum Win culture, which would be 3,000. Sorry, like 2000 BCE or 1500 BCE. So I don't know. I thought maybe this was spread later. But in any case, it looks like Vietic people were probably chewing betel. That's all, for a couple of thousand years at least. That's what it looks like. But I need more evidence. I don't know the details yet. I want to check more to see. Okay, I've talked a lot about native words. Of course, when we think of Vietnamese etymology, we think of Chinese, right? That's what we think of. This is a tremendously large and complex topic, and there are many unanswered questions. Still good progress. Um, so there are these early Chinese loan words, maybe from the first millennium CE. This is all before Sino-Vietnamese. Okay, so I guess you can call it like Tien Han Viet before Sino-Vietnamese and late Old Chinese. Don't worry about these terms too much, but you can see the dynasties if that helps you. So something like from the Han Dynasty to the East Jin, or something like from the Six Kingdoms into the Tang Dynasty. Um, and then maybe late Middle Chinese. This is like towards the end of the Tang, but this is what I'm talking about. Basically, from the Han to the end of the Tang Dynasty. And those are early Chinese loanwords. The Sino-Vietnamese character readings, that's from the late first to the early second millennium. And so I'm not concerned about those so much. Those are the things you can find in a dictionary. These are the ones you can't find in a dictionary. Okay, those are not Chinese character readings. So that dua for chopsticks, you won't see dua listed with that Chinese character. But if you check in here, you will. Okay. So there is a hypothesis of what is called Annamese Chinese. And so that means Chinese spoken in northern Vietnam in the first millennium. Okay. But it is extinct, a centuries extinct local variety, local meaning northern Vietnam. It's kind of parallel to Yue, Yue meaning, the ancestor of Cantonese and Toisanese. So Yue, not Vietnam, but, Yue, uh, well, sorry, that's um, the ancestors of Cantonese and Toisanese, yes. And so this is what accounts for this early period of lexical borrowing. So the idea is there was a large population of Chinese speakers that helped for this borrowing to happen. I'm not going to debate that right now. I think there's a lot of evidence that you had to have a large group of Chinese speakers. But after the end of the Chinese administration in Vietnam, a few centuries, it looks like those speakers of Chinese stopped speaking Chinese and they spoke what became Vietnamese. This is a complex idea, and I don't have time to explain all of it, but this idea of Annamese Chinese just means this is the kind of Chinese, just like Yue. If it was Yue up in Guangdong and Guangxi, and then you would have this Anan Hua or something like that in northern Vietnam. But Anan Hua disappeared. That is the hypothesis, and I think there is support for this. And then there are recent loanwords from Chinese. There's modern Chinese. If you go to Chalan, go to Chalan, and you can hear you know you can hear the Chinese words, and then they get borrowed by Vietnamese speakers sometimes. That's fine. That's more recent. That's not what I'm talking about. So here's some samples. All of the examples I've been giving of like dua, there's that's a doublet. You have dua and ja, and you have for paper zay and ji. If you're pronouncing jir paper, then it's ji. Right? That's the Han Viet. But zay is the early Chinese loan. Those are doublets too. But I've found some triplets of early Chinese loan words. So let's take a look at it. My database contains several hundred potential early Chinese loanwords of medium to high certainty, including numerous semantic domains and these phonological patterns. Okay, so I've taken out some which are triplets. These are all several hundred doublets, but here are some triplets. So this one is pretty well known. That grave here, ma and mo and mo. And you can see here the B, A, and C. I'm not going to explain that in detail. I'm just going to say these are the tone categories. So this is a B tone category, and this is an A tone category, and this is a C tone category. This is good. That means we see this B, A, C, B, A, C, B, A, C, B, A, C. That's good. That means we have patterns. Now, there are some which don't, and this is a surprise. Do you see this 10,000? I'm sure you know this word, moon, and it is ultimately related to van. And it's kind of a surprise that we have this tone. But I think it's hard to say that this is not a Chinese loanword, even though the tone is not perfect, because it's the word 10,000. Where else would this word come from? And if you see the old Chinese form, Myon here is the reconstruction. Moon it has to be. There's no other way. I don't think it's coincidence. And uh, it is also borrowed into Dai. Proto-Dai also has this word. It's just normal to borrow this word for 10,000, right? I think it's in Korean and Japanese as well. So I'm pretty sure this is. But you can see the types of words here. So grave, and disorder, rebellion. This is very abstract, very cultural idea. Belt. This is a grammatical word, kum and kum. So, grammatical words here. Interest and profit, very abstract idea, very, here are numbers. Although we don't use these, right? No, I have never, I've seen it in dictionaries and I have never used these words, right? You only use, I mean, like I guess you could say tunyi, I guess, but I don't even do that. I don't know when you use these. They're in dictionaries. But the 10,000, Vietnamese like the mun nam, mun nam, mun nam, mun nam. No one says that like that, of course. So there are these kinds of words. There are hundreds more, lots of these early Chinese loan words. Okay. Okay, these Vietic words, uncertain direction of borrowing. I used to call them uh, loan words, and now I am not so sure. So here's a word, uh, zu, there for this kind of bush knife. It's a kind of knife that's a little hooked. It's good for cutting, um, you know, um, it's good in the jungle. I guess it's good in the jungle. That word for ditch, muong, vit, and that one may be, and in fact, I should give the different reconstruction for that, but that's okay. Muong, Rao Muong, that's a very interesting one. And this one's very good. This is the Vietic form, and here is the Dai form, and the tone is pretty good. And Mang here for water pipe. It all looks very interesting. I think a very important one is Jam. Drum is, you can see here, they look fairly similar, and yet there's unexpected tone. Don't worry about that, but it's of course very interesting because of the Damsun drums, right? And so is this something that is related to the period of Damsun and the drums? And we don't know. It's just interesting. But it's still, some of this is fuzzy, and I don't know which direction it could be. I don't think there is good evidence that makes it clear. But this is important. Hold on. Okay. While the number of early Chinese loanwords in Vietnamese numbers in the hundreds, the number of possible early shared Dai Vietic words is less than 20 at this point. I mean, this is not a lot. There was much more borrowing from Chinese in that early period, and there's not so much Dai-Vietic exchange. It's just something to notice. So I know that there was contact between the Vietic and Dai people in the early period, but I don't know that there are so many words. There was not so much lexical exchange. Okay, let's go back to those examples of hats. Let's get ready to finish here. Vietnamese mu, hat. Let's go through the list. Mu, there for hat. Sino-Vietnamese Mao, fine. Mandarin Mao, Cantonese Mo. There's that Middle Chinese, we can see is still also kind of a Mao form. Now we see that again. We see this K thing and then an S. And then you'll say, what is that? Why is that there? And in fact, that S is there precisely because of the nga. This S is what gives rise to ultimately to the nga tone here. Okay. However, where's this K thing? What's that about? Now, in Austroasiatic, we do see mu like this approximately in just a few languages that are in Vietnam, Bahnarik, Hatuic, and Khmuic. It's either in Vietnam or maybe in Lao. I don't know. Laos, I mean. Shoto reconstructs Proto-Austroasiatic muk for hat. Oh, wait a minute now. That looks a lot like the Old Chinese form, and I am quite certain that this is not from Proto-Austroasiatic and that this is a Chinese word originally. However, it might have come from Chinese. I don't think so, because I don't think there were Chinese all around Southeast Asia. There are, however, Dai speakers all around Southeast Asia. And this word, which is most likely a Chinese, early Chinese loanword with this K, was borrowed then into these languages. So your Muok there for Thai, Tibeto-Burman here, we're checking them, Burmese, Khmer. But for Austroasiatic, we see a lot of this Muk form, Katuic, several languages, Khmeric. This is all throughout mainland Southeast Asia. It is not in India. It is not in the Munda languages. So these are the areas where there are lots of Dai languages. The Proto-Dai Muk form, it looks like spread into these languages. That's what the data says to me. That's what I think the data clearly shows. But this Vietnamese form, it looks like it's later. I think we have to say it's later. I won't try to support that, but just trust me for now. I think this K is very old. I think that means this is a little bit later than the Dai form. Okay, I think this is a little bit more, I'm a little more confident about this than the fog example. So hypothesis, the old Chinese form with the final K spread very early into Dai. Dai likely later spread this among Austroasiatic languages in mainland Southeast Asia. The later Old Chinese form without K spread into Vietic and then later in a few neighboring Austroasiatic languages. That's what this shows to me by looking at this. And we know that the word hat gets borrowed pretty easily. What about non? Because that one is not in Chinese. Vietnamese non. Now Vietic don here, do you see this? There's that D again. That's what we expect. Okay, I won't show you the pattern, but that's exactly what we expect. And this thing, which is called a glottal stop, gives rise to this zosak sound. Now Khmer has this duan, and that's pretty reasonable. And the ua probably comes from something that's similar to that. This sound is a more recent sound. Shorto reconstructed duan. Okay, with that, precisely with that. This is Ferlus. This is Shorto's reconstruction. And we see it in several Austroasiatic languages, but look at this. Bakhnaric's in Vietnam, Katuic's in Vietnam, Khmeric is next to Vietnam, and Vietic is in Vietnam, and that's it. This word is very local to that specific area of Eastern Southeast Asia. It is in Chamic. So remember, Tezoi was asking before about Chamic words. Here's what we have to say. We have to say that this word was probably borrowed into Chamic, and the reason is this. Look at this sound here is not in Proto-Chamic. It's in this word, but it is not a Proto-Chamic sound. It looks like it borrowed this word, borrowed this sound. And so that means it's probably that way. There's a little archaeological evidence of the conical hat. There's an image of on an object of a person wearing a conical hat, but it's actually in Ban Chang in northeast Thailand. So we don't know where it is. Was it Vietic or Khmeric or another? I don't know. It would be one of these probably, because these are the languages that have them. I could try and say maybe it's Khmeric, maybe it's Vietic, but I just don't know. And I have to say, I cannot know. But this one does seem to be this conical hat, this word, indigenous to this area. And of course, both the Khmeric and Vietic people were They grew a lot of rice. Maybe this conical hat has to do with it, but I don't know. I cannot prove it. Okay, so summary of the data-based inferences. Native vocabulary. A substantial portion of basic Vietnamese vocabulary is connected with Proto-Vietic and even Proto-Austroasiatic. Millennia of Chinese loanwords. Many Chinese loanwords of the first millennium CE demonstrate early introduction of various Chinese cultural practices and concepts in multiple stages. Good. Vietic contact. Vietic common vocabulary, shared vocabulary, supports a hypothesis of early or even pre-Qin contact, but the direction of borrowing cannot be claimed with certainty. More extra-linguistic data is needed. And when I say extra-linguistic, I mean archaeological and historical and ethnographic. Regional language. The sharing of words throughout Southeast Asia for millennia presents many challenges that require careful, diligent checking of all available sources of data. So again, we have to check all of them. So again, the fable of the blind men and the elephant, my last thought here. We must utilize all data sources and methods diligently to weigh possible hypothetical scenarios. And please respect the disciplines, whether it's linguistics or archaeology or historian type of research, and respect the people whose history is being studied, right? I want to be respectful to Vietnamese people and not just make claims, make hypotheses that are not reasonable. But I do have to follow the data. I do have to consider the data, and I have to respect the data. We do have to respect the data, but we must respect the methods, respect the people, respect the disciplines to do this properly. So those are my thoughts.